Hey everyone, welcome to Moby-Dick. We are picking up this week around chapter I have it I we ended off on the sperm whale's head contrasted view, and we're picking up around chapter 75 this week. So I'm going to put a couple of questions on the table for us to think about as we dive into this section of chapters. We ended our last conversation by talking about the violence of whale hunting and the shock of violence and the mere I muted myself and of the mirror of blood in the water that was created, and then talking a bit about whiteness. Um, Isabella, did you want to ask something or?
Well, I was gonna say something, but then I realized, wait, no, I don't need to say that. So then I put my hand down immediately.
Okay, I'm just gonna give some opening thoughts, questions,
Oh,
and then
I
we
I'm
can.
sorry, I just had a moment of like, wait, are we recording? And I saw that we were indeed recording. That's why
Yeah.
that happened. My bad.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Yes, my brain is working at 80% as well, so I appreciate the double check. I'm getting back there. And so I want to talk about chapter 93 today. I want to talk about I'm gonna move backwards and forwards. I'm not gonna move in chronological order. To kind of pick up that conversation about whiteness, I want to look at chapter 93, The Castaway, which is going to take us back to Pip, one of our minor characters, perhaps even very minor characters, who is perhaps a not so minor character after all, who's going to set in motion a subplot that's going to follow us through the rest of the book. If we feel like it, either this week or next week, I also want to talk about chapter 110. I believe it's 110, Queequeg in his coffin, which picks up on page 553, because that's also going to come back to some of the themes that we've been talking about around the narrator, around the relationship between Ishmael and Queequeg, which we sort of get deprived of. I often go back, I feel like, to the opening chapters of this book because we're invited into this wonderful and warm friendship that unfolds between Ishmael and Queequeg, and this kind of love relationship that they have, which is very tender. And here, when Queequeg gets very sick, he decides that he wants to be buried at sea in a coffin, instead of wrapped and given a kind of traditional sailor's burial, which of course is going to then come back and echo in the final pages of the book. There's a question of the coffin floating in the water, which this chapter is going to set up as well. And then between chapters, between 75 and 93, by the time we get up to the castaway, and let me just say 93 and 110 also have in common the kind of cosmology that Melville has continuously returned us to. And there's going to be a couple of passages between 75 and 93 where he reflects on things like Plato's honey head, or Spinoza, or what it means to get lost in the philosopher's thoughts. But he brings us really back to the overarching cosmology of the book and questions of meaning in life. Let me let Joan in. What does it mean to find meaning in a world? If there is God, what does it mean to find meaning in the world if there is no God? what does it mean to find meaning in the world if God may exist, may not exist, but what we really have are traditions that we carry out together with one another. And so we see him drawing us both to, this is the way things are done on the ship. And, this is the tenderness of the relationship between these two very different people, Ishmael and Queequeg. His image of him sitting by his bedside while he's sick. And then we go in that chapter about the squeeze of the hand, which we could talk about as well. But there's kind of, there's this, what's the word? Intimation of the terror of the inner madness that can beset one when they are abandoned by the fellowship of men, when they're isolated in the world, when Pip goes mad, when Queequeg thinks that he's, about to die. What is this madness that comes from that sense of isolation within the self when one feels abandoned in the world? And then to go back, so between 75 and 93, the longer chapter that we have in there, which is going to introduce us to some not often seen foreign characters, is the Pequod meets the Virgin. And so we're in those chapters, we're really we're drawn further into the dissection of the whale. We're going to see the whale decapitated. Tashtego's going to fall into the whale and have to get fished out of the whale and almost die from getting ensnared in the sticky white, what is it? Do they call, what's the sperm, it's not spermicide, which is what I want to say, but the sperm,
Spermaceti.
the spermaceti.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I have the brain of a 12-year-old boy sometimes. The spermaceti of the whale. Sorry. And don't worry, I'm alone in this room, so I'm not coughing on anyone. Just myself. And the kind of masculine ruggedness of what it means to be a whaler. When we get to some of these scenes, I put a little note in my book that, I almost forget what it is that these characters are here to do. Right? We get so lost in the beauty of the image of the whale, of trying to see the whale in the water, the scientific descriptions of the whale, the interactions of the men on the boat. One can almost forget or at least I can almost forget the kind of raw physical nature of this profession, of the sheer strength and guts that we're dealing with, the kind of sweat and the muscle and the blood and the bodies. And we're much more drawn into the body of the whale than the body of the men most of the time. And so in these chapters too, Melville brings us really back to the body of the men. So that's plan. I'm gonna jump to 93 because I want us to look at the language in there, and I really and to get to the last sentence of 93, which is under commented on. Does anyone else want to jump in or add anything before I pull up the screen share and we read some text together?
God, you've even scared Isabella now. Jesus.
Oh.
No, actually, I just
were
have
those scary opening remarks?
I've made many notes of things I will mention later. I am not going to front load all of that stuff. I am using the chat feature to write down things I will mention when it is more appropriate.
You don't have to worry about being appropriate. You're welcome to put anything you want in the chat. Um, and we can come to that too. There's so much in here. There and okay. There's
So you want to talk about the swooping eagle? Is that the point where you want to start?
I want to we're gonna look through 93, and then I wanted, which is page 479. We're gonna look at 479 through 483. And what I want to get to is the last page and a half there. And then I'm gonna go back to I'm gonna work backwards a bit and go to 422
Okay,
to come back
Sam,
to, and then
Sam,
to
Sam,
four.
I think most of us are using a different edition than you are.
Okay.
So, so this is 454 in the,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm gonna pull up screen share so we're gonna start in the castaway. And then I have I'll let, I'll show you. Okay. Books. So we're thrown, I think, right back into the time that Melville's writing in this chapter in the language that we get around blacks and whites that he's using. And Pip is not painted as a runaway slave. In any sort of way. If anything, we get this kind of almost, we get this jovial minstrel kind of portrait of Pip with his tambourine, right? So we can't escape the kind of, I don't racialization of Pip as a character in here, but he's going to be contrasted with Doughboy. Right? So they're talking about, um, poor Pip. So it's the end of the second paragraph there. Poor Pip, ye have heard of him before. He must remember his tambourine on that dramatic midnight, so gloomy jolly. So the earlier chapter, and then we have this the scene before of him falling into the water. An outer aspect, Pip and Doughboy made a match like a black pony and a white one, of equal developments, though of dissimilar color, driven in one eccentric span. But while hapless Doughboy was by nature dull and torpid in his intellects, Pip, though over tender-hearted, was at bottom very bright, with that pleasant, genial, jolly brightness peculiar to his tribe. A tribe which ever enjoy all holidays and festivities with finer, freer relish than any other race. For blacks, the year's calendar should show naught but 365 Fourth of Julys and New Year's Days. We get a bit of Melville's wry political commentary sewn in there as well. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. It came to pass that in the ambergris affair, Stubbs' after oarsman chanced so to sprain his hand as for a time to become quite maimed, and temporarily Pip was put into his place. The first time Stubb lowered with him, Pip evinced much nervousness, but happily for that time escaped close contact with the whale, and therefore came off not altogether discreditably, though Stubb, observing him, took care afterwards to exhort him to cherish his courageousness to the utmost, for he might often find it needful. Now upon the second lowering, the boat paddled upon the whale, and as the fish received the darted iron, it gave its customary rap, which happened, in this instance, to be right under poor Pip's seat. The involuntary consternation of the moment caused him to leap, paddle in hand, out of the boat, and in such a way that part of the slack whale line coming against his chest, he breasted it overboard with him, so as to become entangled in it, when at last plumping into the water. And you remember last time he fell in, he got caught in the nets, and so he was suspended. That instant, the stricken whale started on a fierce run. The line swiftly straightened, and presto, poor Pip came all foaming up to the chocks of the boat, remorselessly dragged there by the line, which had taken several turns around his chest and neck. He's being dragged by the whale. Tashtego stood in the bows. He was full of the fire of the hunt. He hated Pip for a poltroon. Snatching the boat knife from its sheath, he suspended its sharp edge over the line, and turning towards Stubb, exclaimed interrogatively, "Cut?" Meantime, Pip's blue, choked face plainly looked. "Do, for God's sake." All passed in a flash. In less than half a minute, this entire thing happened. "Damn him! Cut!" roared Stubb. And so the whale was lost, and Pip was saved. So soon as he recovered himself, the poor little Negro was assailed by yells and execrations from the crew. Tranquilly permitting these irregular cursings to evaporate, Stubb then, in a plain, businesslike but still half humorous manner, cursed Pip officially, and that done, unofficially gave him much wholesome advice. The substance was, never jump from a boat, Pip, except, but all the rest was indefinite, as the soundest advice ever is. Now, in general, stick to the boat is your true motto in whaling, but cases will sometimes happen when leap from the boat is still better. Right? So here we're given two interdictions, also going to come back to us. So when does one stick to the boat? And when is it better to leap from the boat? Stick to the boat, leap from the boat. Moreover, as if perceiving at last that if he should give undiluted conscientious advice to Pip, he would be leaving him too wide a margin to jump in for the future. Stubb suddenly dropped all advice and concluded with a peremptory command. "Stick to the boat, Pip, or by the Lord, I won't pick you up if you jump. Mind that. We can't afford to lose whales by the likes of you. A whale would sell for 30 times what you would, Pip in Alabama. Bear that in mind, and don't jump anymore." Okay, so again, we come, Melville, quite humorously, brings us back to the kind of rough political reality that the whale is worth more than Pip. Right? The whale, he can sell the whale for more than he could sell Pip. Stop jumping out of the damn boat. Right? I have to save you instead of the whale. And hereby perhaps Stubb indirectly hinted that though man loves his fellow, yet man is a money-making animal, which propensity too often interferes with his benevolence. There we get Melville with his philosophical commentary, right? Man is not a social animal, man is a money-making animal. But we are all in the hands of the gods, and Pip jumped again. Right? This is quite, stop jumping out of the boat. And then there's no interdiction fails. Pip jumps out of the boat again. Beautiful use of a semicolon there. It was under very similar circumstances to the first performance, but this time he did not breast out the line, and hence when the whale started to run, Pip was left behind on the sea, like a hurried traveler's trunk. Alas! Stubb was still but true to his word. It was a beautiful, bounteous blue day. The spangled sea, calm and cool, and flatly stretching away all around to the horizon, like gold beater skin hammered out to the extremest. Bobbing up and down in that sea, Pip's ebon head showed like a head of cloves. The contrast between the tone is really humorous as well. So we go from the beautiful, bounteous blue, spangled sea, calm, cool, round, horizon gold. A lot of fascination, a lot of inner rhyming. It creates this kind of, almost fireworks of plosives, bounteous blue. And then we get to bobbing, beautiful, bounteous blue, and bobbing, which is this kind of chewing word. Bobbing up and down in the sea. There's Pip. No boat knife, right? So we come down to these harder words. Head showed like a head of cloves. No boat knife was lifted when he fell so rapidly astern. Stubbs' inexorable back was turned upon him, and the whale was winged. In 3 minutes, a whole mile of shoreless ocean was between Pip and Stubbs. Out from the center of the sea, poor Pip turned his crisp, curling black head to the sun. Another lonely castaway, though the loftiest and the brightest. Now in the calm weather, to swim in the open ocean is as easy to the practiced swimmer as to ride in a spring carriage ashore. But the awful lonesomeness is intolerable. The intense concentration of self in the middle of such a heartless immensity, my God, who can tell it? Mark how when sailors in a dead calm bath in the open sea, mark how closely they hug their ship and only coast along her sides. Right, so we get, man, money-making animal, really man, social animal. Man needs to be near to something. And so Melville's giving us this image of, a mile of water between Pip and the boat, and Pip bobbing alone in the middle of the sea in this concentration of a person in the middle of this immense vastness. And it's not that, to swim the open waters for an unpracticed swimmer is difficult, but it's intolerable. There's something intolerable about this image of a man being completely alone in the middle of the ocean. And that there's something in our nature that makes us want to cling to the side of something, right? We have to hold on to something. But had Stubb really abandoned the poor little Negro to his fate? No, he did not mean to at last, because there were 2 boats in his wake. And he supposed, no doubt, that they would, of course, come up to Pip very quickly and pick him up. Though indeed such considerateness towards oarsmen jeopardized through their own timidity. It's not always manifested by the hunters in all similar instances. And such instances not infrequently occur, almost invariably in the fishery, a coward, so-called, is marked by the same ruthless detestation peculiar to military navies and armies. And so now we're going to go into the final couple of paragraphs here, and the language is really important. So picking up here, it says, but it so happened that those boats, without seeing Pip, suddenly spying whales close to them on one side, turned and gave chase. Right? So they're so fixed on seeing and pursuing the whale, right? We've been talking a lot about what the eye is trained to see and what we can see. And here, so Stubb is, stop jumping off the damn boat, Pip. Pip jumps out the boat again. And now Stubb's like, screw it, the other boats will get him. But the other boats are giving chase to the whales, right? They see the whale, they don't see Pip. And there's different registers that we can read that on, but there's a question about the visibility of Pip in the water. We know from the previous two paragraphs that we can see Pip, that we can see him bobbing out there, right? Up and down in the sea, like a head of cloves. And, so you have the white whale, you have the whale in the water, and you have Pip, who's black. And this chapter began with the comparison between Doughboy and Pip, who are like opposite sides of the same coin, these kind of men on the boat who have a different value to begin with. And we have the white man, Doughboy, who's not very bright, is a bit slow. And then we have Pip, who's bright and quick. And so we get the contrast of personalities. And we come back to now it's the contrast between Pip and the whales. And by the merest chances, the ship itself at last rescued him. But from that hour, but it's kind of Melville gives us this idea that it wasn't even an intentional rescue. But from that hour, the little Negro went about the deck an idiot. Such, at least, they say he was. So we start with this portrait of Pip, so the dull and torpid doughboy. And Pip is very tender-hearted, but he's bright, right? He's very smart. He's pleasant. He's kindly. And so we get now this idea that something changes in Pip. There's something about this experience that fundamentally changes Pip and is going to change Pip's character for the rest of the book, especially in the scene that's coming where he'll confront Ahab. By the merest chance, the ship rescued him. Right? Went about the deck an idiot. The sea had jeeringly kept his finite body up, but drowned his infinite soul. The sea had kept his body up, the bobbing, but it drowned the infinite of his soul. What does it mean to say drown the infinite of his soul? Not drown entirely, though. Rather carried down alive to wondrous depths, where strange shapes of the unwarped primal world glided to and fro before his passive eyes. And the miser merman, wisdom, revealed his hoarded heaps. And among the joyous, heartless, ever juvenile eternities, Pip saw the multitudinous, God omnipresent, coral insects that out of the firmament of waters heaved the colossal orbs. He saw God's foot upon the treadle of the loom and spoke it, and therefore his shipmates called him mad. So man's insanity is heaven's sense, and wandering from all mortal reason, man comes at last to that celestial thought, which to reason is absurd and frantic, and weal or woe feels then uncompromised, indifferent as his God. For the rest, blame not Stubb too hardly. The thing is common in that fishery, and in the sequel of the narrative, it will then be seen what like abandonment befell myself. So the narrator inserts himself then in the final sentence of this chapter. right? Sequel of the narrative of what's happening here in this minor story where Pip is almost lost at sea and goes mad, that something similar is going to happen to the narrator himself. There's going to be some kind of abandonment. And I'm gonna stop. Anyone wanna, before I say more, anyone wanna jump in? Thoughts?
Isn't the narrator Ishmael?
This is what I'm saying.
Oh, good. Thank God. Please say it more accurately.
I mean I made like a big old post in the discussion forum comment Fred place. Don't know what it's officially called, so I just used every single name at once there for clarity. Uh and I'm not gonna repeat all that, but I have put my thoughts out there. Sort of what I've been contemplating as I've been going through this.
Yeah, about it is Ishmael, right? That's our narrator. Our narrator has inserted himself now in the final sentence here, comparing himself to Pip,
And foreshadowing the end of the book, right? Yeah, okay.
foreshadowing the end of the book.
I don't, Isabel, I don't, if you're putting stuff in the chat, it doesn't seem to be showing up.
Oh, not this chat. The chat on Substack for the
The
novel.
thread, I think.
That's what I
Okay,
was
okay,
That's
okay.
what I was using in literally every single name except for Substack, which I should have used.
Uh, okay, okay. All right. Just 16 more windows to open to figure that out. All right, thank you.
Um, I can put a link to the chat. So there, there you go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, which I don't, I think you have to turn on notifications for the chat. It turns, Substack can be a little, the chat function in Substack's not ideal.
I have a question.
Yeah. Hey,
Um,
Marilyn.
so it's just a outside question, but the name Pip, of course, makes one think of Great Expectations, but I think that was published later. So I was wondering, is the name Pip a common name in that period? That's one question. The second thing is thinking about Great Expectations, the two Pips seem like they have similar circumstances and fates in a way, although Pip of Great Expectations ends better. But he's an outcast and he's harmed by the society and taken advantage of and so forth. So I just wondered about the name Pip, if you know anything about it.
I think we talked a little bit about the name last time, and I remember we worked out the chronology. So Great Expectations was published in so
1861, I looked it up.
what's the year? It's 61?
60 to 61, yeah.
Yeah. And so we do have Pip there. So Moby Dick was published first. Um the I think there are similarities. I think we were gonna look up to see if Dickens had been reading. No, I believe Dickens had read a novel, but I can't remember where we left off that conversation. Um, there's um I don't, does anybody have any insights on the name Pip that we haven't um talked about yet? I don't know if I have any other.
It just seems like it's a name of an outcast. That's what I was just thinking. And I've never heard it in any other context in all my reading, so I just brought that up. So
Why does it sound like the name of an outcast? Is it the association
It's just
of,
the way he's treated. It's not that the name, it's that the context created that for both of those stories.
yeah. Uh,
So I just wondered in the culture of the time, if you knew if that name, I know we talked about it last week, but this is a different question. If that name was like a sort of like a a negative for somebody. If you called someone a pip, if you called someone pip, it was just
ah. So like pipsqueak to
yeah,
like a little pip.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'm looking at the etymology of the word because that's what I do. And a pip is a seed, so it is something small.
I was also looking at the etymology, and here on Wikipedia, apparently Pip is
Yeah,
diminutive for Philip, and Philip means
yeah,
fond of horses.
yeah. Well, in Great Expectations, it's a mispronunciation of Philip Perrip. Philip Perrip becomes Pip. Yeah, Joan.
Yeah, there's an informal, and I was trying to find this in the dictionary, but an informal meaning, a slang meaning, which is a minor, unspecified human ailment. Like you've got something wrong with you. It's a pip. I've seen that in a poem, and that's why I knew it had another meaning besides like small or just a little hatchling or so it can also mean there's something a little awry.
Yeah. I mean, it's also it makes me think of a bird.
Yeah, it is one of the it's to break through the shell as in a hatchling, used of a chick. Yes.
Yeah. Um,
But it does have a slang meaning that I think is sort of old, very old fashioned that we don't use. So
yeah. I think there's well, I'm wondering there's it's also a very tonal word, like pip pip. Um, and I'm thinking about the musicality of Pip and the way that he's portrayed. But yeah, Alfred?
It's also pretty minimal in sound.
Yeah.
Like this like little black boy doesn't even get a full name. It's just like Pip. That's all he gets.
He just gets yeah. So and it's in terms of sound, it expresses frustration, irritation, grief, exasperation, annoyance, displeasure, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Um, to be pipped is also to wound or kill with a gun in British slang. Um, but it's diminutive to go back to the first point, I think, which is what Alfred is saying as well. It's a diminutive name. It's not a full name. It's just it's a kind of, it's a single note.
So in the structure of the story, Pip uh, is an important character because it's somehow he's containing um, a lot of negative aspects. Like he's over here and all this that comes to him, even though some of it is the experience of existential aloneness.
Yeah.
But I think in the structure of the story, he kind of contains a lot of emotions.
Yeah. Yes. He contains emotions. He also I think in this chapter, we're thinking about what he becomes the container, the seed for. This is where we get the implantation of the mad of the kind of swell toward madness as well. That carries that's going to carry us through. We were talking a couple of weeks ago about the name Ishmael and the the obvious kind of biblical roots of such a name. Um, and here there's this, not Martha, this kind of tiny seed of a name and this question of what he's holding and what he's containing. And he becomes the idiot, right? Which is to say he becomes the fool. He becomes the fool in terms of the character mirror to take us through the rest of the book. And it brings us, Melville, Margaret, it brings us back to, in those final, man's insanity. Pip saw the multitudinous God omnipresent. Coral insects that out of the firmament of waters heaved the colossal orbs. It's almost like he was thrown back into the belly of creation and had to be born up from the ocean, lost in those waters. He saw God's foot upon the treadle of the womb. Right? And you hear, I think of womb and deaths and the fates, and spoke it. And therefore shipmates called him mad. He saw man's insanity is heaven's sense. And this is also going to come back to the final lines, not the postscript, but the main text. And wandering from all the mortal reason, man comes at last to that celestial thought, which to reason is absurd and frantic. So it's somewhat like one can either belong to heaven's sense, to celestial thought, to be the fool, or one can inhabit mortal reason, which finds these, not wonder, but absurdity and franticness, what we would call existential kind of ails. Which makes me think that reason is what produces questions of existentialism. And Wheeler Woe feels then uncompromised, indifferent as his God. Margaret, do you want to jump in? Sorry, I see you had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, no, on the name, the thing about both characters, both in Dickens and here, is that each of them they are potentiality in human form. The characters are they are seeds of the potential of what could happen. And so we're told about how this Pip, he has smarts in him. He has all this stuff in him. And why not use a diminutive, particularly a diminutive that means the seed that could grow into one direction, but yet, as is the bigger story of the book, with a blink of an eye kind of action, everything changes.
Yeah.
And so there can be all this potential, there can be expectations, there can be all kinds of stuff, but then something happens, and that something, whether it's getting your leg taken by the whale, whether it's, going overboard this way, it changes everything.
Yeah.
And you can go from being a guy with a tambourine to raving around on the boat,
Yeah.
So it just, that immediacy really got to me. And that stuck, both in the diminutiveness and the musicality, as you said, that it really sort of hits that, so that's what I want to point out.
Yeah. Yeah. David, you want to respond?
Yeah, I didn't have a response on the name. I was going to switch to just the last line of that paragraph that you read about the indifference of
God.
of God. And you raised the question early on, like what when we're searching for meaning without God, where does that leave us? And here there is almost that biblical, like if you look, I just looked up Ezekiel, right? The visions of God, and has that same type of, and there's another one where I think I thought it was Ezekiel, but it's not, where they only sees like the foot of God, and like the foot is mentioned in that paragraph. So it has that biblical overtones, but here God is not present in the world. It, it is very indifferent. And it's a nice parallel to Pip being alone in the sea, which is also indifferent and just being alone without any fellowship. And
Yeah.
even Pip, who is now able to kind of commune with the undifferentiated forms, right? Melville mentions Plato all the time. It just leaves us alone. And it is really, I don't know we can handle it. I think he's suggesting we just can't handle like the truth, the world by itself. We need something, commerce, fellowship, Ahab's madness, something to hang on to.
We need some ship
Some ship. Yeah.
to, to hold on to. I mean, it's also, I hear you have a bit of Nietzsche in what you're saying. We need our myths.
Yeah.
There's something about the pure, Heidegger uses the word thrownness, not to bring him into this, but I want to say the pure thrownness of being, that sense of having appeared here. Is that a burden or is it a gift? Is it damnation or is it promise? What does it mean to have appeared here and to have appeared in a world that pre-exists us? What is it that one chooses to cling to? I think is part of Melville's question. We have to cling to the side of something, because if we don't, we go mad. If we don't, we go mad, and then we are thrown into the chaos of God's indifference, which is not to say that it's not real, but that there's something about it that's too much for the human spirit. There's something about that crushes the human soul. When he says, to go back up further, the sea had jeeringly, mockingly, right? In that bobbing up and down in the spangled sea, calm and cool, this beautiful sea, serene. The sea was mocking him by keeping him afloat, because there was something damning in being left alone, abandoned in the water. Jeeringly kept his finite, his human body up, his finite body. But it drowned the infinite of his soul. So we have the finite body, which dies, and we have the infinite of the soul.
Yeah.
And not drowned entirely, though. It carried down alive. It took this part of him, and we have Dante here, right? This is Dante. This is going down into the underworld. It carried that infinite part of his being down to wondrous depths, where strange shapes of the unwarped primal, right? And Melville's turning around the creation story in a way there too, right? The hand of God hovered over the face of the deep and gave form. And so here, the soul is taken down to the primal, to these wondrous depths where there are strange shapes, right? We don't have the warp and weave. We have that, we have the deep. and glided to and fro before his passive eyes. And the miser merman, wisdom. The miser merman, wisdom. Why is wisdom a miser merman? Revealed his hoarded heaps. Right? This is also what this is what the sirens promise Odysseus. To go back to that, wisdom, knowledge of all things. There's a storehouse of wisdom, the hoarded heaps. Why does wisdom hoard? Right? So he's a miser. Wisdom is a miser who lives in the deeps, not in the Platonic forms above, but to this place where the soul has been dragged down. And he sees the hoarded heaps. And among the joyous, heartless, ever juvenile eternities, joyous and heartless, juvenile, Pip saw the multitudinous, God ever present, omnipresent, coral insects that out of the firmament of waters, right, not the heavens, he's inverted. Melville has turned the whole of creation upside down. He has put heaven in the belly of the sea, not in the sky. Heave the colossal orbs. He sees the seed of creation. And you have both the image of the ova and the sperm in the wateriness of the womb, of the orbs and the insects. Right? So it's both the belly, we talk about being in the belly of the whale and Jonah in the belly of the whale. And here's also that kind of Ezekiel creation in the belly of the sea. Why is it that we think we come from the heavens when we're born from waters? You could ask that as well. It'd be interesting to draw this scene as an image, the artistic ones.
It also kind of reflects, not to preview the end, but those last chapters are just whirl of images and madness.
What is
that all bad?
What is madness?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
But is it all bad? I mean, isn't it kind of, I mean, doesn't he actually, in your own argument,
Don't
doesn't
make
it
me laugh,
actually,
it hurts.
okay, sorry. Doesn't it actually, I mean, I read this as kind of celebratory, which would suggest that, the isolation is not all bad.
Well, no, I think that's entirely right. So personally, I choose to read this when I'm not trying to dissect it for literary treasure. I read it as this experience of actually having the soul taken down to this watery depth and seeing the seed of creation and being returned to the ship, not as the clever little black boy, but as the fool that leads the whole cycle from the beginning again here. And then to be brought back down to the wheel or the woe, right? The wheel of fate, right? For better or worse. We can't control that. That there's something about existence that we fundamentally do not have control over. The many parts of existence we don't have control over. But realizing the total indifference, to go back to where David started this, the total indifference of his shipmates, seeing that they're chasing the whale, they're not rescuing him. The total indifference of God, that he's bobbing up and down in this beautiful, serene sea. And there's this contrast, between the fact that he's probably going to die and the sheer pleasantness of the experience, which is the human condition, right? Oh, it's so fun here. You're gonna die, right? You can't stay, right? There's this kind of mockingness that happens. But he's returned from the depths. He has wisdom now. He has true wisdom. He has a gift. And it's only madness to those who have not gone to the underworlds. It's only madness to those who have not seen God's foot, right, upon the loom of creation. Then it's only madness. I don't think it's a question of good or bad. It's a question of what we choose to call reason. And it's a question of that making a meaning, and it's a question of what we choose to cling to. And just, come back to the end. What does our survivor cling to? Coffin. He's going to cling to a coffin to survive. He has to cling to death, not death, the container of that finite body, in order to survive. Is it Isabella, Barbara?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
If Barbara has something more directly relating this to say, I would let her go first because I kind of have more tangentially related comments.
Okay. Barbara, you want to jump in?
Sure. This passage is like so stunning, so I'm happy we're spending so much time on it. I'm just struck, actually, almost most of all by the 3 words "and spoke it." So Pip goes down and then he returns and he speaks it. And what does it mean to speak that experience? And then, Samantha, when you were talking about the last line, what like abandonment befell myself,
Yeah.
if like the whole novel is the speaking it seems, which is like putting that madness into words that we can read as a new form of reason, like knowledge not under the frame or the umbrella of reason, but knowledge under the frame of the deep, or however we understand it. And that was a really, I liked thinking in that space of how one speaks an experience like this.
Yeah. He saw God's foot upon the treadle of the loom and spoke it. He spoke it. So it also brings to mind it's Abraham, right? Who returns, who gets to see God and speak of the experience. And what happens to the one who sees God and speaks of that experience? Hart, did you want to jump in? I saw your hand up.
Okay. I just had trouble getting past the sort of cringy racial politics of the way that this character was portrayed. Just this the pleasant, genial, jolly brightness peculiar to his tribe, and with his tambourine, that he's kind of this minstrel figure in that stereotype. But
Yeah.
particularly this sentence going back to the beginning: for blacks, the year's calendar should show naught but 365 Fourth of Julys and New Year's Days. I wish I could just say that was ironic, but I couldn't help thinking of, the July 5th, 1852 speech of Frederick Douglass, and,
Yes.
What he has to say about the 4th of July. But I don't know. I don't know if anybody had similar reactions.
Well, that was my first thought too. What is the 4th of July to a slave? And I read Melville as being ironic here, kind of making that point, but maybe people read it differently. Does anyone want to?
I mean, I will say that I also found it a little wind-swervy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read it as ironic. I don't think you can. I don't. He does so many kind of outrageous turnarounds in terms of races, and I do actually think his description of other people's, it can start out as sounding racist, but he ultimately is always praising other tribes, not the white man, and the beauty of other other races. I think we can't look at it backwards that way. I think it takes away.
I don't know, but one counterpoint would certainly be the image of Flask sitting on the shoulders of Tashtego, if you want to look at.
Yeah.
Except he's sort of a joker in some ways. He's a nothing. And you get that. I mean, the way he describes these, Queequeg and Tashtego, they have this regal quality and strength and grace that it, it's not the way Stubb or Flask are described. They're kind of, I think he looks down on Stubb and Flask in a lot of ways, because he derides, I mean, subtly the way they behave. And that you have to stand on someone else's shoulders, that's like a sign of your own weakness.
I guess
Go for it.
I was just gonna say, I guess part of it too is that for so much of the narration, at least not all of it, but certainly a decent chunk is very tongue planted firmly in cheek, as it were. Like well, I can't go back to it, but like one of my favorite passages in the book about like the spout of the whale is presented with a very like sophisticated frankness, but it's saying such absurd things that like it's obviously a joke. So like, obviously example of like saying what I'm trying to say is that the novel there are parts where it's hard to tell whether it's a joke or not because the jokes are presented in a very wry way, and that's true for the satire too, which lends a kind of nuance to the whole thing.
I think that's right. I think often Melville he signals those turns in tone through sound. So it's very, to go back to, even, the depiction of Stubb in this chapter, which is quite funny because Stubb's kind of one note, right? He doesn't have, we see a lot more Stubb than Pip, but Pip has more character complexity in a lot of ways. And we get the contrast between Doughboy and Pip, and we learn that, Pip's from Tallinn County in Connecticut. And we get the image of him with the with the tambourine, which is a kind of, we get this kind of, smiling traditional minstrel portrait of him. And he becomes, I think, for Melville, he becomes it is a caricature of a Black person. There's play throughout the book on, I think, what it means to, to humanize. And we see that often, in the descriptions of the whale. So there's one passage, where he, let's see, is it cistern and buckets? I don't think so. Where is it? Heidelbergton stopped. Well, I mean, if we even go back to it's the last paragraph of Cistern and Buckets. And I think it's the next chapter, but so Tashtego almost dies. And it's a very different portrait of the death. And we have Queequeg who saves him. Queequeg who is compared to an obstetrician, right? Who basically births Teshego out of the head, performing his agile obstetrics. So he's been coughing in the head. And then where's the passage? We get the reference to fallen in, the last line there is quite interesting, but I'm not going to read it. I think it was in the readings we had for 2 weeks ago, maybe. I don't know if I can find the passage.
I will say when it comes to humanizing the whale, my first thought is the one passage, which I can probably try and look up on Gutenberg using good old Control F, about like comparing like the whale, whaling out there, and coming up to spout to a guy smoking his pipe. Alas, that pipe would be his last. That was kind of my first thought when you're talking about play and humanizing the whale.
Yeah. It's not there was another one that I was looking for, but I don't know if I can find it now.
Sam, can I
Yeah.
can I interject? In an earlier chapter, the first lowering.
Yeah.
There's this where Little Flask was mounted upon gigantic Dagu was yet more curious. Anyway, let me just go on. On his broad back, flaxen-haired Flask seemed a snowflake. The bearer looked nobler than the rider. And then farther down, so have I seen passion. I've seen passion and vanity stamping the living magnanimous earth, but the earth did not alter her tides and her seasons for that. I do think he does invest um, the non-white characters with much more kind of nobility throughout. I see that definitely as a threat.
Yeah.
Joan, what chapter was that? Are you reading
This is
from?
in the first lowering, and I have a different edition.
Just
Let's
chapter
see.
number? How about it?
Okay,
Just a
yeah, let me
chapter?
get to that. Let's see. Wait a minute. It's chapter 48.
Thank you.
The passage I was looking for is the last couple of sentences of the right whale's head, chapter 75.
Oh yeah.
And these precede the chapters leading up to the discussions of phrenology.
Oh God.
It says, so it's 390, 391 in this edition, but it's just the last paragraph of 75. Can you catch the expression of the sperm whales there? So we've gone, we're kind of coming to the end of the long description of the whale, and there's lots of comparisons. And then the last passages, we're going to get this kind of humanizing, right? The whale becomes philosopher. It is the same he died with, only some of the longer wrinkles in the forehead seem now faded away. I think his broad brow to be full of a prairie-like placidity, born of a speculative indifference as to death. But mark the other head's expression. See that amazing lower lip, pressed by accident against the vessel's side, so as firmly to embrace the jaw. Does not this whole head seem to speak of an enormous practical resolution in facing death? The right whale I take to have been a Stoic, sperm whale a Platonian, who might have taken up Spinoza in his later years.
Now that's tongue in cheek, you got to admit.
Yeah.
Well, it is.
Talking about tongue in cheek, oh goodness. I don't want to like completely take this away, but there's one passage from the spout of the whale that I really, really, really love. It's one of my favorite jokes in the book.
Okay.
Simply because I have such a visceral memory of like reading through the book. I'm like coming across it, reading it, stopping, realizing how freaking funny it was, and then bursting out laughing and going back to read again. Right. Give me one moment to find it. Spout, spout. The fountain. It's called the fountain. So this is in chapter 85, where Ishmael is talking about why he thinks that the whales spout. Is it water? Is it mist? What is it? My hypothesis, he says, is this, that the spout is nothing but mist. And besides other reasons, to this conclusion I am impelled by considerations touching the great inherent dignity and sublimity of the sperm whale. I account him no common shallow being, inasmuch as it is an undisputed fact that he is never found on soundings or near shores, as other whales sometimes are. He is both ponderous and profound. And I am convinced that from the heads of all ponderous, profound beings, such as Plato, Pyrrho, the devil, Jupiter, Dante, and so on, there always goes up a certain semi-visible steam while in the act of thinking deep thoughts. While composing a little treatise on eternity, I had the curiosity to place a mirror before me, and ere long saw reflected there a curious involved whirming and undulation in the atmosphere over my head. The invariable moisture of my hair, while plunged in deep thought, after 6 cups of hot tea in my thin-shingled attic of an August noon, this seems an additional argument for the above supposition. I'm sorry, I just wanted to share that.
Sam,
What
I'm
do you?
sorry. I just may have disrupted the point you were going to make about Spinoza and the Stoics.
Oh, well, we can come back to that. Isabella, since you just read this passage, do you want to say something about it?
I'm gonna be honest, it was very self-indulgent to me to share it. I just wanted to appreciate its comedic value. And also, I guess,
Duly,
use it as another example of the tongue-in-cheek style of narration, but I'm gonna confess it was a little self-indulgent to me to share.
that's okay. I did get a kick out of it, I will say.
Um, there's I think so where was it? It was 75. And then I wanted to look at 422. That there, so that we have the Stoic, right? The kind of indifference, as I'll put it, and then the Platonist who might have become a Spinozist. Excuse me, in his excuse me, in his later years. Then I think it's an expansion of the reflection on indifference. It's not indifference, but there's something about the the imminence of the about reaching for that there's something considered about the gaze. Terry, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, because I think the matching with this end of 75, if you look at the end of
Yeah.
85, chapter 85, the last paragraph, which I'm happy to read,
Go for it.
and how nobly it raises our conceit of the mighty, misty monster to behold him solemnly sailing through a calm tropical sea, his vast mild head overhung by a canopy of vapor, engendered by his incommunicable contemplations, and that vapor, as you will sometimes see it, glorified by a rainbow, as if heaven itself had put its seal upon his thoughts. For do you see, rainbows do not visit the clear air, they only irradiate vapor. And so, through all the thick mists of the dim doubts in my mind, divine intuitions now and then shoot, enkindling my fog with a heavenly ray. And for this I thank God, for all have doubts, many deny. But doubts or denials, few along with them have intuitions. Doubts of all things earthly, Stoic, and intuitions of some things heavenly, Platonic. This combination makes neither believer nor infidel, but makes a man who regards them both with equal eye.
Bravo.
Do you want to say something about the passage?
No, just that I think when you say when one says sort of tongue in cheek, it's also serious, and it is linking whale to man, man, to whale, using the metaphor, um, and to me, it is a tension between Stoics and Platonists, and like many things in this book, there is no absolute answer.
Yeah. There's no how nobly it raises our conceit of the mighty,
Mhm.
right? So steeped in 6 cups of tea in an attic on an August noon. Misty monster, to behold him solemnly sailing through a calm tropical sea, his vast mild head overhung by a canopy of vapor, engendered by his incommunicable contemplations, and that vapor, glorified by a rainbow, as if heaven itself had put its seal upon his thoughts. So somehow this fountain, a kind of representation of the inner workings. We can't see the inner workings of the whale, what it may or may not be thinking. It's also the illusion between the mighty and the monster. But there is this impression on the surface, which is beautiful, which is a rainbow. Thick mists of dim doubts in my mind, right? So here we have this heavenly creature gliding through the water, this spray of thoughts blessed by the mint of a heavenly rainbow, contrasted with the human thick mists of dim doubts. Dark, cloudy, gloomy. Divine intuitions now, and then shoot. Divine intuitions now, and then shoot. So divine is an imperative. We can read that.
I
Divine,
think it's I think it's now and then shoot. That's the way you want to
and
say
then
that, right?
divine
It's the-
intuition now, and then shoot.
or else now and then, on occasion, shoot. That's the way I read that now and then.
And so, through
Me
all the
too.
thick mist of the dim doubts in my mind, divine intuitions now and then shoot. Well, there's a question of whether or not it's passive or active.
Okay, I'm sorry. Completely sorry I said that. Never mind.
Why?
Withdrawn. This
I
is
think
that
it's, I don't
we
think
have
it's
7 minutes. We have 7 minutes. Let's not get hung up on now and then.
well, we should always get
Absolutely,
hung
yes,
up
I
on now
I
and then.
agree.
And kindling my fog with a heavenly ray, and for this I thank God. For all have doubts, many deny, but doubts or denials, few along with them, have intuitions. Doubts or denials, and few along with them have intuitions. So there's something about doubts and denials and the fogginess, divine intuitions now and then, doubts of all things earthly, and intuitions of some things heavenly. This combination makes neither believer nor infidel, but makes a man who regards them both with equal eye. We have, a kind of, we're going back to that finite, infinite contrast that we were talking about a little bit ago. We have a meditation on the idea of intuition being contrasted with something that's earthly. Divine intuitions, intuitions of some things heavenly. And on the earthly side, we have denial and we have doubt. And we wonder at and question this finite human existence, but we have intuitions of things that are not earthly, that we don't wonder and doubt at. And there's a contrast set up there. I want to go back to page 422, and then I'll come to Hart and Alfred just quickly, just to look at this passage. So at the end of the honor and the glory of the wailing, the honor and glory of wailing, and this penultimate paragraph, and we come back squarely to the question of naming God, and he says, nor do heroes, saints, demigods, and prophets alone comprise the whole roll of our order. Our Grand Master is still to be named, for like royal kings of old times, we find the headwaters of our fraternity in nothing short of the great gods themselves. That wondrous oriental story is now to be rehearsed from the Shaster, which gives us the dread Vishnu, one of the three persons in the Godhead of the Hindus, gives us the divine Vishnu himself for our Lord. Vishnu, who by the first of his 10 earthly incarnations has forever set apart and sanctified the whale. When Brahma, or the god of gods, saith the Shaster, resolved to recreate the world after one of its periodical dissolutions, he gave birth to Vishnu to preside over the work. But the Vedas, or mystical books, whose perusal would seem to have been indispensable to Vishnu before beginning the creation, and which therefore must have contained something in the shape of practical hints to young architects, these Vedas were lying at the bottom of the waters. So Vishnu became incarnate in a whale, and sounding down in him to the uttermost depths, rescued the sacred volumes. Was not this Vishnu a whalesman then, even as a man who rides a horse is called a horseman? Perseus, St. George, Hercules, Jonah, and Vishnu, there's a member roll call for you. What club but the whaleman's can head off like that? It comes back to this, and then, how nobly it raises our conceit of this mighty misty monster to behold him solemnly. There's something, and it, back to that passage that Isabella read, Plato and Pyrrho and Devil and Jupiter and Dante, they all go, looking for that semi-visible stream up or down, the act of thinking deep thoughts. We talk about thinking deep thoughts or elevated thoughts, right? Thoughts have a kind of directionality to give them a thickness or a thinness. But this is Melville intentionally complicating any sort of division in tradition, right? We haven't named the Grand Master of all. Alfred, do you want to jump in? To say?
Yeah, just the combination of everything that we have discussed so far tonight. I started the evening, not it's not evening, the call, the day, um, um, interested in Pip as like a contrast to Ahab, since they're both mad, but they occupy polar opposite positions in the social hierarchy,
Yeah.
and are opposite in a lot of ways too. And from the earlier part that we read, from the Castaway chapter, made me real curious how to interpret um, what he says in the chapter about Queequeg's coffin, because I don't understand it, and I hope someone else might. But now I'm thinking maybe there's a third mad character being Moby-Dick. Um, and yeah, I wonder if I'm reading too much into it, or I don't know. I guess like the mention of like the sperm whale as perhaps being Platonists or Spinozans, um, uh, made me think that might be a possible reading. So
Mm.
anyway, that's something I'll be tracking as we finish the book.
Yeah. I think there's a question of who the madness belongs to. And we've, we spend so many of these chapters trying to image the whale in our minds. And we get a sense of what it means to be in pursuit of a whale. But there's this other thing, there's this ineffable thing. And, if we were to take maybe a crude Platonic lens to that reading, Alfred, we could say that the madness is already in the whale. It is what creates the madness in Ahab. That there is the imprint of the madness that one has to give chase to, right? There's a kind of mirroring there in terms of form that one's actually chasing. So we have Pip who's dragged into the water, and he's dragged along by a whale and out into the middle of the sea. And we get the comparison to Dante clearly. At the end of the book, when the ship goes down, is that also a going under? Is that a kind of Dantean going under? Is there something that leads us to the middle of the forest? To go back to the opening lines of the book, when we have that November of the soul, is there something that makes us walk into the woods to follow it? And then what is that? What is that turn that happens somewhere in midlife? I think is a question too about what we give chase to. Catherine?
Just very quickly, I just made a chat remark that it seemed, and we were reading this about Jupiter Dante and those last two paragraphs. It seems Melville speaking, not Ishmael.
Which two paragraphs is this?
The one that you read, Isabella, and then the paragraph at that, when he's talking about this whole aspect of the vapor, but intuition, and to me, I was reading that as Melville, the author, and not Ishmael, the narrator.
Yeah.
Just a quick observation.
I had wanted to agree with that. I had my hand up earlier because the chapter "The Fountain" has these two very self-conscious moments where the narrator steps out into the foreground, both at the end with the part that Isabella read with him looking in the mirror, but also at the beginning where there's the parenthetical notation of the time, 15 and a quarter minutes past 1 p.m. on the 16th day of December, AD 1851. So that seems like Melville at his writing table, putting sort of a postmark there.
Yeah.
Wonderful discussion today.
Yeah, wonderful. It's so nice to be back. I missed everyone last week. We can add an extra session either before or after the holiday if we want. And I'll see some of you for Yates in about half an hour. But I will have we can talk a bit next time too about books that are coming up in the new year. Thank you, everyone. I'll send the recording and the chat notes as requested. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me know if there's anything in particular you want me to talk about too, always. Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.